Whatever.
Whatever.
Let's do whatever.
Ta-ta, girls.
And on that note, welcome back to another Not a Strong Start, the only place where you get a bunch of filmmakers talking about film, TV, and throwing our hands in the air like we just don't care. Whoop, whoop.
Oh, wait, off screen. Here we go, on screen.
On screen. So it's like wax on, wax off.
Wax off.
Wax on, wax off. Perfect.
Today, I shall be your host. Just plain old Jorge Marrero, because why would I put anything special on front of my name?
Yeah.
Who cares,
Yeah.
right?
He doesn't have. He's the host. We don't have to.
Yeah, do what I want.
Yeah.
And I am not your host. Even my butt can make metaphors.
And me, I'm the other guy. Today, we are Groot.
Yes, we are. If you guys haven't figured it out yet, we're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It's out now in theaters. I'm pretty sure we were all pretty excited about this. You know, we're all James Gunn fans, that's fair to say. And so with that, anyone who doesn't know this, James Gunn, this is his last one, written, directed, huge cast with this one. It's so many people. Obviously, we get Chris Pratt returning, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Palm, Clementif, Vin Diesel, Chuck Woody Iwuji, Sean Gunn, which I'm glad his brother's getting a bigger part. Like he feels a part of the team now.
Yeah.
You know, we also get some new people with Will Poulter and Maria Bakalova, which I don't know if anyone really noticed it. She was Cosmo. Scene stealing Cosmo.
Yeah.
Karen Gillan, of course. Man, I love Karen Gillan in this movie so much. But we'll get into that.
And then Nathan Fillion, man. I love Nathan Fillion when I saw him.
I guess cameos. We got some cameos in there. You know, Nathan Fillion. We got Linda Cardellini as Layla. Even, I don't know if anyone noticed this, Pete Davidson.
Who was he in that?
Pete Davidson was the weird creature that Palm or Mantis saves later on in the movie, where she was afraid. She's like, ah, and then she's like, oh, I was afraid of the thing behind you, not you.
Yeah, the voice. He did the voice of that thing.
That was Pete Davidson.
That's funny. Of course, he's gonna play a weird character.
Yeah,
that makes sense. No wonder, because I saw the picture with him off, like the mask off, and I looked, he was wearing like a suit of something. I didn't know he played that. You know,
that thing,
deformed that thing.
A completely not ugly thing.
Yeah,
the thing. It was so adorable. I totally want to hug it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jose, what were some of the things that kind of put you off on this when watching this movie in the theaters?
One of the things that really stood out in this movie, and it is kind of nitpicking for me, but one of the things is Warlock felt underused in this movie. In the end, he really only served one purpose in the movie. His action at the end of the movie could have easily been taken care of by changing the writing a little bit. You know, give this character his helmet, and then all of a sudden now he doesn't need to be right. First of all,
do we want spoilers? Spoilers?
I was about to say,
spoiler
warning before I say anything more. We will be doing spoilers. Here we go. All right. So now let me rephrase that sentence. Yeah. His only purpose in the end ended up being just to save Star-Lord. And that was it. You could have easily done other things, like have him use his normal helmet that he does, and all of a sudden he doesn't need to get rescued at the end. Yeah. And you could have just taken Warlock out of the movie and nothing would have changed. That was my biggest gripe with the movie itself. And it had nothing to do how Warlock was played. I got the concept that he wasn't matured yet. He was released too early. So there was like a usefulness to the character, a naiveness. I get all that. But in the main story, it didn't serve a purpose. And when you have so much to cover with this being the bookend of a trilogy, you could have easily taken that out.
I agree with that. I felt like, for all the same reasons that you said, it felt a little underutilized. I do like, though, the visual element. It kind of looks like the man touches God, you know, like you saw the Pay the Da Vinci. That was pretty cool. I like how they did that. Him being stuck in space, though, I feel like we saw that already, right? When he went
in every movie.
Like, yes, they already did that. Like, they already did that. We saw it already. So it kind of lost its appeal. You know, he wasn't going to die. It's kind of funny how his face kind of ballooned, and then all of a sudden he was back to normal again, like the very next scene. So Whatever. How about you, George?
I'm gonna piggyback that and expand upon that scene a little bit, just because I agree. It's on my list. Adam Warlock was an afterthought. It showed. I think this was the outcome of firing James Gunn and then rehiring him, honestly, because we knew he's supposed to play a bigger part in the Endgame storyline, and they didn't get to use him because of everything that happened with that drama, you know. And now he's stuck with this character that he had to use somehow, and they were going to use eventually. So this is what we have. But with that, there's a misuse of space in this movie. So we've established when you're in outer space that you can't breathe, you'll freeze up, like you will die pretty much. 5 minutes before he's out in space, they're all in their ships trying to like get to the high evolutionary and all that stuff. And each of their little ships gets broken into by the enemies that are coming. So all of their windshields, we'll say, are broken open and exposed to outer space, yet they all survive like nothing's going on. No one's having incapabilities of breathing. No one's freezing up. They're all okay. It's like, did you just forget the rule that you just established before and after? But I can't help but get upset when James Gunn is so good at the meticulousness of things. He's so good at the little things that when something like that comes by, it's like, oh, how did that get missed? We dropped the ball on that.
I can see that, and that's the thing with there was moments in the movie where he addressed similar situations where there a hole or there will be a breach on the ship, and they actually addressed in the last movie where a lot of these ships were built to automatically create like a shielding in a way. And this happened in volume 2 and it happened at moments here. But during that moments in that scene, you didn't visually see that occur. So like it's something that it was definitely overlooked, but they could have easily explained it if they just would have stuck with some of the things they've already established, gearing back to the old movies with the capabilities of some of these ships and the tech.
All right. So here's one that I had. It felt a little too long, felt a little too lengthy. They could have condensed it. It feels like every single movie that comes out now is like 2.5 hours. It's just like, okay, already, man. I had to take like 2 bathroom breaks during that movie. I drank a lot of water, but still, I had to do 2 bathroom breaks. I'm like, come on, man. Here's one that I saw. Like, I understand the high evolutionary, like the reason why they told us that he needed to get Rocket. I just don't think it was strong enough because he essentially just wanted his brain. Right, essentially is what he wanted, but it was just kind of a dumb excuse to me. Like, you could have made it bigger, you could have made it a little more impactful, because he needed Rocket to be able to further evolutionize these animals. But then why didn't he try to duplicate Rocket after Rocket? Because instead he was trying to use that machine to, again, quicken the process. But when he created Rocket, clearly there was something about Rocket that was different. But you never saw him attempting to create another rocket. Like, you had the other raccoons, but it just seemed like he didn't go the approach of following the exact same process that they followed. And if it was so stuck about the brain of Rocket, it just, I don't know, man. It was like, okay, if Rocket was so special, well, why? They didn't really tell us that. And Rocket always seemed like he was a very good mechanic, not necessarily a scientist. And in this one, they kind of presented that it was more science-based for him. And it's just, some things just wasn't quite making sense to me. And just them sending with the hit from Adam Warlock that ultimately sent him into a coma. I like the idea of them going on this mission to heal Rocket, but it just seemed very kind of convenient how the stuff happened. And it just didn't seem so universe bending. Like the universe was at perils over this.
I will say I like that the universe was not at peril. We got so much of that that I like when it's more contained. Though, at least the way I took it in, it seemed like there was a uniqueness to Rocket. There was a uniqueness to him. Even though through the experiment, his own intelligence, that was unique. It wasn't so much the process. It was like something within him took better, because he wasn't the only one out of that 8-9 grouping. Because when we got the pods, that was the 9 zeros. That was the new evolution. So he wasn't the only other 8-9 batch to go through. And the fact that which got him upset and hurt his ego, is the fact that one of his creations was able to solve something that he wasn't able to solve. And it was a mechanical thing. It was how that device was working. So yes, it is science, but engineering can be a form of science.
It is.
And that's that mechanical aspect where he was able to figure out. So like, I get why he wanted Rocket, because even through all his advancements and creation, Rocket was perfect inside the brain in an imperfect shell, and he wanted 100% perfect. So he's been able to create these outside perfect shells, but whatever Rocket had in his brain was the only time he's been able to get the perfect inside. So he wanted to take that so that he can transfer that into his perfect shells, so he can make his perfect overall creations and build his world from the one thing that was missing. That's the one thing that he can never replicate, because something about Rocket was different.
I think what you're looking for, Dan, is like maybe before he grabbed Rocket out of the cage, they had maybe like those little rat mazes to test intelligence.
Correct.
I think if they had a scene where they show them going through like just normal animal tests, and then maybe if he excelled with those tests, all right, he's the raccoon I want to use.
Yes.
He might be the best susceptible to these testings, kind of like Wolverine being used for the Weapon X program. I think that's 100%. What you're looking for, right?
100%. That's what I'm saying, because I agree with what Jose's saying. That's what they're telling us. But again, show don't tell. I want to see it, because the only time you gave me that moment that they do show he knew more than the high evolutionary, but he was already worked on. So had I seen what George said, that little tiny mat race, the raccoon race or something, the maze, if he would have accomplished something like that, that would have told me him as a raccoon prior to that was already special. That's what I wanted to see.
I think why that scene doesn't affect, like, I'm with Jose, it doesn't affect us the same way it affected you, is because I look at that scene as like he did the exact same experiment on the other three animals. So like Layla, Teef, and Floor all had the exact same procedure done to them, but yet none of those three had the same outcome that Rocket had. They couldn't solve problems the way Rocket could solve problems. And so I think that was the moment. That's the thing that shows it's like, oh, he's clearly different. He's clearly special. Whatever happened, his molecular structure with that testing, it's like Peter Parker being bitten by a spider. If someone else got bitten by a spider, they would have died. But Peter Parker's blood is what made him become Spider-Man. Rocket's brain is what made him become Rocket,
Yeah. But my only thing to that would be, then why didn't you try to do the exact same thing with the exact same creature?
That's where it goes to Jose's thing, where it's like he doesn't want to replicate another shell. He wants to replicate that brain inside of a perfect body. He's trying to find a way to kind of almost commercialize. He wants to McDonald's this thing up and just have it pumped out in a much faster rate, because he's creating planets. He's creating whole civilizations. I'd say my other thing, and it's going to go off of the high evolutionary also, I felt he wasn't used to his full potential and became more of just like a loudspeaker to yell. He's a super intelligent character. Now, this is where knowing things about comic books can be a great thing and a hindrance all at the same time. All right. I know that the High Evolutionary is tied to Scarlet Witch and Mr. Sinister of the X-Men, and even the Jackal tied to Spider-Man. Like, he's tied to every evolutionary character, like a character that deals with evolution and the biometrics of creation. That's what he's tied to. He's a very old character from Earth, by the way. So there's so much they should have tied to older stories and newer stories to make this feel like it's a part of the MCU. And he himself should have been less yelly and more intellectually devastating. His prowess should have been intellect, and he should have loomed that over everybody. So when they're in moments, kind of like when he's with Peter and Groot, and he's just like, 1 second, he doesn't say anything, he just puts his finger up. Like, you're going to wait because I'm above you. There should have been more of that, as opposed to just like being upset and annoyed by everything. I wish that they had to build up to that moment as opposed to just having it through most of the movie. But that's the downfall of Guardians of the Galaxy. I feel like their villains get underplayed.
Yes, I agree with that. We just, discussed villains, and I like they could have played a little bit like the Ozymandias in Watchmen, where there's like a confidence of your intelligence. And it's like, I don't need to. When you always have to resort to yelling, it's showing a lack of confidence in what it is that you have to say, right? Because when you're intelligent, you expect the others to listen. You don't have to yell and scream and do all that stuff. You don't have to do that. And I agree with you.
If I were to devil's advocate that, although I do agree with your point, is I feel the yelly moments only came when it's something revolving around Rocket, because it seemed that the fact that this creation was able to figure out something that he couldn't, it stripped that confidence away in a way, because that's when we first saw him lose composure, is after Rocket figured that out and he came looking drunk into like that cage room. It seems like whatever he thought of himself, Rocket doing that was the one thing that shook that armor, put that shink in that armor. So by the end of it, the fact that he still hasn't been able to get Rocket and he's been getting the better of him, I think that was what was affecting that. That being said, I do agree. It would have been better if we saw more of that version of him.
I think I was telling this to my wife as we watched it, and I compared it. There's a big comparison to like how Americans act and how British people act. British people handle anger and emotion in a much more refined way than Americans do. With American acting, it's always like, I'm angry now, so now I gotta yell. That's the only way you're gonna figure it out that I'm really angry. They don't know how to downplay it, and it feels bad because like everyone in this was a good actor. Like there was no bad acting. There just needed to be an adjustment in how things were portrayed. And this is something. And bringing up Ozymandias was a great example because Matthew Good, UK actor, you know. So it's just like that proves the point right there.
On the positive, the door is open for him to return and possibly be more like that character. So that's the positive, is we might still get that version, especially if now the storyline with Rocket, which was affecting him so negatively, is done with.
Let's hop on to what's good about this movie, because there's a lot that's good about this film. Right. I think it's safe to say we all actually enjoyed this movie. So don't think by us talking about the bad things, we just wanted to get the bad stuff out of the way, because there's a lot of good. You want to start us off, Dan? What was something that you really enjoyed?
I think the biggest one, and we're all going to agree on, is Rocket's backstory. Like the way, I mean, it's probably the best thing out of the entire movie, in my opinion. It's always interesting when you present new characters, because when you set again, spoiler talk, but when you set up new characters just to essentially die, it's very easy to have them come across as throwaway characters and like, oh, you just gave us something to make us feel. But we really did feel for these characters, and it gave the backstory of Rocket that they kept hinting at in the past, but they never told us. James Gunn over-delivered on what that backstory was. It was deeper. It was more sad than I expected. And it was the more interesting parts to me of the movie, to be honest with you. When we kept going back to his backstory, I was just way more fascinated, and like I wanted to see more of it. And the moment when Lila comes out and, you know, he's walking and he sees the two other friends there, and it's just like, it reminded me of like the movie Up, where it's just like, damn you, man, like you're getting me, man. You're bringing these tears. Like, just a phenomenal job. And they did what Ant-Man 3 could not do, meaning like you're giving us the sad, but you're properly balancing comedy with the sadness. And Ant-Man 3 just could not do that. Like Thor: Love and Thunder just could not do that. James Gunn did it.
I think that is such a great choice. And the thing is, the whole thing, his whole backstory, all those flashbacks, especially when they really get into it, it felt so un-Disney. And I loved every second of it. James Gunn was like, on the way out the door, he was like, F it, I'm not coming back. I'm gonna walk that line. I'm gonna walk that line through this movie. I'm gonna throw an F-bomb, I'm gonna throw an a-hole, and then the level of darkness and what I'm gonna show and trauma, I'm gonna push that envelope a little bit more than Disney usually does. And I loved every part of it.
I'd argue to say that this is probably the most Disney, just because any Disney cartoon you'd watch, death is almost in every single Disney thing you see. Mothers die, fathers die, you know.
Bambi.
I always think of Bambi. I remember seeing Bambi as a kid in the theaters. First scene, mom dies. It was such a sad thing. I remember crying as a kid watching that. And this brought that back to me. Like I was like, is James Gunn gonna make me cry right now? And not by laughter. It's like, that's not the deal we had, Mr. Gunn. I think also how he tackles the flashbacks. Flashbacks are not always handled the best way in films. They could be a great story device, but sometimes people don't know how to handle them. You know, they don't know how to interject them in the story, and sometimes you lose pacing and the story beats can just become convoluted. The fact that he used it as a flashback within his comatose, like he's dying and this is what Rocket's seeing every time. So we're delving into his mind. I thought that was the best way to handle that, so we could still feel the emotion and the gravity of everything that's happened to Rocket and continuing to happen to him. I was super connected. For me, this was the most emotionally heavy movie of the whole trilogy. And it's not like there hasn't been heavy moments with the other two. This just hit harder than any of the rest. And I think it's because we've seen so much of Rocket, and as an audience, we love his character. He's someone we want to see.
Breadcrumbs.
The breadcrumbs.
Yeah, they've put these breadcrumbs since the first movie, and like Dan said, we got that payoff finally.
Yeah, above and beyond. Totally above and beyond. A Rocket is the heart of the movie. We actually get a lot of him because of his story, but at the same time, we also don't get a lot of Rocket in this movie, which is really odd. You know, we see him, yes, but we don't get the Rocket that we know and love. During that whole escapade of trying to save him, there were so many moments of like, man, I wonder how Rocket would have been in this situation of them on that organic space station. How would he have been? How would he have handled that? What would he have said or done? And there was little moments like that where it's like, oh, I wish Rocket was here, but I get it. He can't be here. We have to, like, this is all for him. So it's such an odd dynamic where it's like I'm being pulled back and forth on my emotions of like, oh, this is what I want, but you're giving me something so much more at the same time.
I think one of the highlights, out of the many highlights, one of the highlights is how they treated the team as a whole throughout this movie. I feel every member had moments to show depth and then also moments to shine. More than the other movies, in this one, you can see their field teamwork, especially like in that hallway scene. Gotta love hallway scenes when the exit gets around. So you have like that hallway scene, or even in the like organic station when they get into battle there. This movie, I think more than the other ones, showed actually the teamwork in the field, how they fought together. I hit this guy, then you hit him, then I move you here. Like that teamwork was shown very well throughout it. And then throughout the movie, you can see each member serving their purpose in the team. Sometimes you get these big teams and you're like, what are you bringing to the table, Hawkeye? Just go sit in the corner with your arrows. Black Widow will handle what you can handle. But like here, you get to see each member serve their purpose and how they each are a part of it. And the team is not as successful if you just take away one member. So I think the way they handled the teams in terms of that, which isn't easy when you have such a big ensemble, where every character was able to shine, I think was well done throughout by James Gunn.
Man, that one shot was unbelievable. That fight scene, unbelievable. I think that was the best action sequence he's had in any of these Guardian movies. It was just phenomenal to watch, man. And he still added a little comedy of the little fluffy guy running on the guy's face, whatever it was. Like, that's what I'm talking about. You see this cool bad moment, and like what you said, George, we weren't getting Rocket fighting with him, but the second that he did, he gives us that hallway scene. It's like, yeah, and you see Rocket with a big old gun, ba ba ba, and it was like, yeah, man, you got me hyped up again.
I'm not running anymore.
Yeah, and it was like, got us, man, got us again.
We've talked about this on the side where like I don't think Volume 2 captures the emotional growth as well, just because certain things within the core team is repeated, while with this we have new members to build off of, like Nebula and Mantis. And granted, they're characters that we've been seeing, some since part 1, some since after. So they're not new, but they are at the same time because we've never seen them in this dynamic where they're officially all Guardians of the Galaxy. You know, and seeing like Nebula's growth from all of the movies is just so important and immaculate, like going from villain to good guy and almost like a leader of the team. You know, at times, like all of that was so important. And then Gamora and Peter, the fact that they didn't make them come back together again. Thank you so much. Yeah, like there was no romantic relationships at all in this whole movie. You know, one could argue Rocket's and Layla's, but the core team, there wasn't. And I like that. I like that this is a family. When they argue, it's like a brother and sister arguing. You know, it's not two opposing friends.
They did tease with Quill and Nebula a little bit, which I thought was hilarious.
That's fine. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I thought that was well done because like, you just teased at it for the comedic relief. Like, you know, you do have beautiful eyes. She goes, that my dad picked out.
And that was
That
improvised
is
too. That whole line was
oh,
improvised
Oh,
between
really?
yeah.
nice.
So Chris Pratt had improvised that part, and then off screen, James Gunn improvised her lines, and then they kept it in the movie.
Oh,
That's
that's
funny.
awesome.
Yeah.
You know, I did enjoy that part because again, we got the will they, won't they for like the first couple of movies, and they finally got together. And it was like we've talked about this before on how TV shows, one of the detriments for TV shows is when they overuse the will they, don't they, and they redo it over and over again. So I like that they didn't do that, and it made perfect sense. I mean, this showed us just like in real life how a person's experience makes a big difference in shaping them who they are and like who they become. The old Gamora went from Thanos to working with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So she grew with that team and that shaped who she became by the time, we got to like Endgame, Infinity War, and all of that. This Gamora went from that to leaving away from the Guardians of the Galaxy. And then you can see at the end is she built a family already, but with the Ravengers, she built a new family. So her personality, who she is different than the Gamora we had before. So it makes sense that she's not going to create the same level of connections that her other self did.
It's also a huge compliment to James Gunn too, because he had a pivot with the Gamora character, right? Because the Russo brothers are the ones that decided that Gamora was going to die in the movie. He didn't decide that, so that forced him to have to alter and Omaha what he did with her. So that's why I give him props for this, man. And I think James Gunn he's a really good director. Like, I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's a very fun person and a very fun personality, but he's really, really good at the craft at what he does. He understands characters very well. He understands story beat balance very well. He's just very good at it. And I felt like part 3 was a good bounce back because part 2 was good, but it wasn't as good as part 1. I felt like part 3 was a nice bounce back.
This was a proper sequel. To really toot his horn a little further, a big thing that I thought that was the shining thing for him out of all of the series, and is continue with this, is that you're not going to get any better creatures or settings than what James Gunn has produced out of the Guardians series. Like in this, the creatures and costuming and the design of everything, like when we're on that organic space station, you're not seeing anything that looks like that in the rest of the MCU. That's only from his head can we get something like that. And it felt like everything feels lived in. It feels tangible, seeing the growth of nowhere, the skull of a celestial that we saw from part 1 up until now. Like, now it's a home. Before, it felt like this place where like no good near dwellers are going, it's like now it's a home for refuge. All of this stuff is just so well designed and so well crafted. Like, it always stands out to me. You brought up, Jose, or Dan, but you brought up the whole thing with Ant-Man 3 and how this shows how you get it done. Ant-Man 3 felt like a green screen room. None of this felt like that. I always felt like I was there with them. So who was your standout person in this whole movie?
This was tough. So many good characters. Honestly, I could not decide between Rocket and Nebula for me.
Yeah.
But it's all for the same reason, so I'm going to group them together. Is both characters have just grown so much since their introduction into the MCU. And in this movie, it felt like they were finally able to overcome their trauma and their inner demons in order to find new life. So everything that we've heard about their life, everything that we've seen them on screen experience, finally paid off where these characters can then be happy again. And I felt that made them stand out.
I'm going to pick a different one just because you already touched on them. I'm going with Mantis. Same reason that you said. She had a huge growth from hers. I love at the very end when she says she needs to find her own path. She's becoming somebody that was like a beta, like very much like a servant, to becoming somebody that's trying to find her own way. And when you see her standing up against Nebula, you see her standing up to fight for Drax and even putting down Drax, because before Drax would always be the one to put her down. I love the growth of her character. I think the actress is really good. She plays her so well. And she's actually, in my opinion, the actress is one of the better comedic actors in the group of the Guardians, because her delivery is so spot on. It's so perfect. Do you remember even when they're helping the animals escape and she has that, that random person that's on nowhere is standing there and she throws the monkey and the monkey starts slicing that person's face. I was dying. Mantis always delivers those lines that I'm just cracking up the most for whatever reason. And I'm just surprised. I'm surprised that she's one of the funniest, probably top 3 out of the entire group. She's hilarious to me. Like, so she was a standout performer for me.
I wish I can have a different person to pick, but I'm with Jose. Like Nebula. Nebula's growth for me was just superb, honestly. And it ties to Rocket. The two of them have such a mirrored background. It's so similar, and seeing how she can relate with him and everything, with from old to new, was just amazing. Like I hope we don't lose her. I want to get more of her in the future. I know we're not going to get Batista, Zaldana, or Cooper going forward, but I haven't heard anything about her not coming back, so I hope she does.
Man, that moment when she finds out over the comms that Rocket is good to go, and you see her actually like cry for the first time, like really, like I was like, what a difference for this character.
Well, what is the final verdict for this movie? We haven't talked about these numbers with each other, so I'm very curious to see what it's going to come down to. What is your final score, Jose?
By the end of the movie had made me laugh and made me cry. I had moments that hyped me up. And overall, the movie just made me feel a wide spectrum of emotions while still keeping me entertained. So because of that, I had to go with a 9 for this movie.
That's some high praise. How about you, Dan?
This movie was very hard for me to grade, to be honest with you. Normally I have an answer right away, and I always say by the time I have to watch the movie a second time for it to settle, and usually it's within like a half-point difference if it moves at all. This is one that I'm trying to remove biasness from it because I'm very biased about the first one. I freaking love the first one. I think it's one of my favorite MCU movies easily. So this one, I started off as like a 7.0, 7.5 range. Then it's kind of moved up to a 7.58 range for me. And this is one that like I absolutely need to watch it a second time, just because I know it's going to fluctuate a little bit, because there was some stuff that stuck out to me that like, oh man, I wish they would have really improved upon that. But then as I stepped away, the nostalgia of me of the characters and how much I love them so much, I keep thinking about. So that's what's made the score rise up a little bit. So I don't know how biased I'm being in my score, or if I was just being overly critical at the time that I first watched it. So when I watch it a second time, I'm going to get a better grasp. So right now I'm within that 7.58 range. That's where I feel comfortable at.
I teetered back and forth very much like yourself, Dan. That's why I didn't give a score through our whole conversation. But I can say now I'm probably at a good solid 8. I don't have to even question the back and forth. Like I know it's an 8, and it's surprising because in my pros and cons list, I have a lot of cons. There's some cons I didn't even mention on our conversation here.
Same.
You know, there's some big hits. It's like, oh, that's so bad. Yeah, you know, but this is one of those things where even like I only have 4 positive things about this movie. I mean, 3. I have 3 positive things, and we've talked about all of them here. But those things are so good that they can outweigh some of the really bad stuff that's really cringy bad. It's just like when you deliver some of that emotion, like so impactful, it rises to the top.
And that's what I'm saying. And that's where it's hard for us, because we've talked about other movies like this that we don't give the benefit of the doubt to. Even though they had great moments, we still are very harsh with our criticisms. And with this one, where you and I are being a little more lenient than we normally are. And we're both acknowledging that. Yeah, we are. That's how I know I'm a little biased towards it, because I love these characters so much. That's why I'm very aware of that. That's why I really need to give it a second time and try to be as critical as possible with it, because I love these characters. So when they say something, I laugh even more than I normally would, because I love these characters so much.
I think what it is, because the ball wasn't dropped on the characters.
Yes.
That's why.
Correct.
The characters that we've grown to love, he didn't drop the ball on them. He stayed true to them and gave them their proper send-off.
Exactly.
I think that's what it is.
Cool.
Well, with that, thank you again for watching another episode of Not a Strong Start. As always, you can follow us on the Twitters, on the Grams. Don't forget to hit those noti bells. Freaking comment. Let us know what you think. All right. I'm not a mind reader. Are you a mind reader, Dan? I don't think so. We want to know what you're thinking. All right. That follow, so you can always be notified whenever we're popping up. So we're popping up everywhere. Where can they follow you guys?
Well, I'm even my butt can make metaphors, and you can find me at This Is Mi Nombre on Instagram.
And let me just tell you, Jose definitely showed us some of those metaphors live in person. And we are Groot. You can follow me at King_Sangre.
And of course, I am Jorge Marrero. Follow me at Nicolopoulos. It's in the description. You click it. You can pop it in.